Hello, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to episode 34 of my Logic Pro 10 video tutorial series. In this episode, we'll wrap up MIDI quantization, and I'll show you a few of the advanced quantization features in Logic. In the previous video, I showed you guys how you can click on a region and quantize the entire region to just one MIDI quantization value, which is why it was called region-based quantization, because it quantizes everything in the region to the same value. So I showed you that you can select a region, go up to the region parameters here, and if the menu is not open, you can open it up, go to the quantize menu here, and choose whatever rhythmic value you want. So I'm going to choose a 16th note for this, and you'll see that all of the notes snap to the nearest 16th note. What I didn't show was some of the parameters under this More menu. When you open this up, toward the bottom, there are 5 advanced quantization features. You have Q-Strength, Q-Range, Q-Flam, Q-Velocity, Q-Length. In Logic 9, there was actually a separate menu just for these 5, and it said advanced quantization above it. So that's been kind of taken out in Logic 10. I'm not going to go over all 5 of these, and actually, believe it or not, Q-Swing is also considered an advanced quantization feature, but we talked about that in the previous video already. I'm only going to go over 3 of the 5 of these. I'm going to go over Q-Strength, Q-Range, and Q-Flam, just because I feel that those 3 are the most useful functions. Q-Velocity and Q-Length I don't really care for because they don't really do anything that I need them to do. So they don't. You'd think that with Q-Velocity, it makes all of your velocities the same, or Q-Length makes all of your lengths the same. That's actually not what it does. It does something similar to that, but it doesn't actually do that. So I'll show you how to do that in a later video. So for today, we're just going to go over Q-Strength, Q-Range, and Q-Flam. So let's listen to what we've got going on here. So we've got a synth up here, that's the one we just quantized. We've got a little piano melody, a bass that's already been quantized, and some drums that are already quantized as well. So let's take just a look at our piano melody here. I'm just going to mute everything else out and just adjust my cycle range here. And let's open this up in the piano roll and take a listen to it. So this was played in with a MIDI keyboard. So just like any other MIDI recording where you actually play it in, some of the notes are off the grid. You know, so in this case, a lot of them are a little far off the grid. Some are a little closer than others, but it seems like the whole recording is behind. So we can quantize this, and it looks like my quantization value, but the best one's going to be a 16th note. So I'm going to click on it, go to the quantize menu over here, choose a 16th note. All of the notes snap to their nearest 16th. So how do the advanced quantization features come into play? Well, let's start with Q-Strength. Q-Strength essentially intentionally unquantizes the notes by a factor between 1 and 100. Right now, we've quantized all these notes at 100%, which means they are right on their intended target. They're perfectly quantized to the grid. Q-Strength lets us kind of roll down the amount of quantization we have, so we can create something, create a quantization that's maybe a little more human. You know, part of the whole point of having a recording that sounds like a human played it is that it's not perfect. You know, so we can kind of make this the quantization. You can move some of these notes slightly off the grid. So the Q-Strength menu will basically be blank, and if you click on it and pull down, you'll see that you're pulling down values from 100%. So all the way up is actually 100%. And as you pull down, you are going to make these notes slowly drift away from the grid. You'll see some of the notes are starting to pull away from their intended targets on the grid. So if I pull down to something like 60%, There we go, 59%, that works. You'll see that the notes on the grid are, again, drifting even further away from their intended target. So this can kind of give us a more human feel where we, want notes that intentionally be slightly off the grid. The only thing I'm going to do here is there's just this little roll at the beginning. It kind of, just quantizing this kind of messed this up. So I'm just going to go ahead and just manually edit this just to make sure it's in place. There we go. So let's listen to this. So it's close to the grid, but it's not perfectly on the grid, but it's better than it was before I quantized. One quick thing I should mention is that if you try to mess with the advanced quantization parameters down here without quantizing up here first, nothing will happen. For these to work, you have to make sure you choose a quantization value, then go mess with the advanced quantization parameters. So I'm going to roll the Q strength back up to 100%. There we go. And you'll see everything's now perfectly on the grid again. The next advanced quantization parameter is Q range. Q range basically lets you quantize notes within or outside a set boundary or a set range. So what you get are a series of positive values and negative values. And a lot of these look a lot like our quantization parameters that we looked at back in the first part of this quantization series, which was episode 32. If you choose a positive value like this, let's choose positive 1/64th note. Now let's see what that does to the notes. You'll see that some of the notes are perfectly on the grid still. Others have basically unquantized. What your Q range does is when you choose a positive value like 1/64th, what this means is that notes that are outside of a 64th note away from their intended target will not be quantized, and notes that are within a 64th note away from their intended target will be quantized. So you can see here that this note, this one, and this one are all perfectly on the grid because they were already pretty close to where they were supposed to be located. All of the other ones were further than a 64th note away, and therefore were left unquantized. So now just so we can see this, because I'm going to flip this to negative 164, just so we can see this better, when I flip it to negative 164, I'm going to pull the velocities down just to give them a different color. And let's choose negative 164. And by the way, it also shows you in ticks and in milliseconds. So what you'll see now is all of the notes that were quantized before, the blue ones, are now slightly off the grid. But you can see in most cases they're really, really close to the grid because that's where they actually were played. All of the other notes that weren't quantized before are now quantized. So basically what this does is it does the opposite of what we did before. Notes that are within a 64th note away from their intended target are not quantized, so the blue ones, and notes that are outside of a 64th note away from their intended target are quantized. Now, what can this be used for practically? If you're working with a recording where it's generally a good recording, everything is pretty close to being on the grid, and you don't want to hard quantize it to make it sound, robotic. You still want to maintain the human character to it. What you can do with Q range is you can set it to a negative value, like I have here, so that notes that are really off, notes that are really, really off, will be quantized and fixed. But the notes that are pretty close to the grid already, hence the blue ones, will be left alone because there's really no reason to quantize them because they're already so close to where they're supposed to be. So that's Q range. Again, I don't really use Q range much, I'll be honest. But the next one I do use a lot, Q-Flam. Q-Flam is really cool because what it does is it's essentially offset quantization. And to show you what this does, I actually have a separate region over here. So let me just open this up. And all this is right now are just some kind of, just some eighth note or actually quarter note chords that are kind of played short. So it sounds like this. What we can do with Q-Flam is we can offset a stacked chord like this, meaning you can take a stacked chord and you can create arpeggios with it. First, we have to choose a quantization value. Even though these are already perfectly in time, you still have to choose a quantization value. So I'm going to choose a quarter note because that's where all the notes are. Go to Q-Flam, and you'll see that the list for Q-Flam is a lot like Q-Range. We get these positive rhythmic values and negative rhythmic values. When you choose a positive value, say like a 16th note, you'll see that all of the notes in each chord now have been offset by 1 16th note. And so we basically have 16th note arpeggios now. So this is really cool. This is something that's like a functional thing that you can use to kind of add to like a chord progression that you've played in. Likewise, if I choose a negative value, I'll choose negative 116. What this is going to do is it's going to do the same thing, but instead of going from down to up, it's going from up to down, from highest to lowest. Now, the thing about Q-Flam that a lot of people get confused about is Q-Flam is not an arpeggiator. It's it's not like the arpeggiator plugin that we now have in Logic 10, where you just you plop the thing on there, hold a chord, and it goes crazy. You can only arpeggiate upward or downward with Q-Flam. You can't do up and down, at least not easily. You'd have to like chop up the region and start moving little clips around, and at that point, you might as well just use the arpeggiator plugin. So that's the Q-Flam feature. It's really cool. Q velocity, Q length, don't worry about those. I'll show you a better way later on to complete those functions to make velocities all the same and note lengths all the same. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.